Exploring the bizarre. Your e-ticket ride into the world of the paranormal. Strap yourself in as we traverse the universe exploring the unexplained. UFOs, ghosts, lost worlds, cryptozoology, as well as other dimensions. It's time to take back the night. Now, your electrifying hosts of Exploring the Bizarre, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
Hi, Tim. Okay, what's that crazy contraption you're working on?
I'm just tinkering, but simmer down and hand me that lug wrench over there, will you? And
Okay.
I finally cracked the secrets of traveling back and forth through time.
Oh, come on. That's really that's just crazy. You're really losing it.
Well, I'm almost finished here, and we can both get into my time machine and head off into the void of space. Don't you want to do that? Travel in time.
Oh, boy.
A bit of whirling and whirling. That's what we need to do.
Wow, it seems that you've really done it. We seem to have traveled back in time. Uh-oh. And here comes a big-ass T-Rex ready to stop us into the ground.
Let's put the pedal to the metal and go somewhere else, I guess. It's time to get out of here.
Okay, as long as you don't land in the middle of Custer's Last Stand or the Battle of Bunker Hill. Here, I say we head back to the KCR radio in Vegas, where all we have to worry about is finding ourselves inside Area 51, surrounded by security guards with rifles.
Zip,
zip,
zap,
zap,
zip, zap, zing. Hello, Tim.
Are we back?
I guess we're back. And my goodness, so why am I wearing bell bottoms? What year is this?
I don't know, but I got these puka shells around my neck, so I'm not quite sure.
And both of our hair is really long. This must be the 1970s. Maybe if we go through this door over there that says "Do not open," we'll get back to the modern year, the time we are supposed to be in. Let's pull it open. Hey, this looks familiar. Well, let's settle down here at the microphone. Tim, how you doing out there in Jasper, regardless of whatever time period it is?
Well, I'm doing great, Tim. It's wonderful to be back on Exploring the Bizarre for another week and another fantastic guest.
And indeed it is. So, Tim, well, let's dive right in and tell us who we're going to be speaking with this evening. I'm looking forward to it.
Well, it's my pleasure, Tim. Tonight, I'm very happy to introduce Dr. Michael P. Masters. Now, Dr. Masters is a professor of biological anthropology at Montana Tech in Butte, Montana. Now, Dr. Masters received a PhD in anthropology from The Ohio State University in 2009. Collectively, Dr. Masters' background, education, and current research program combined to offer a unique perspective and a novel approach to addressing unanswered questions pertaining to a widely recognized yet poorly understood aspect of modern global culture. Now, his new book, which we'll be talking about tonight, is called Identified Flying Objects, a multidisciplinary scientific approach to the UFO phenomenon. This book challenges readers to consider new possibilities while cultivating conversations about our ever-evolving understanding of time and time travel. So, Dr. Masters, thank you very much for being with us tonight on Exploring the Bizarre.
Thanks so much. It's great to be here. I appreciate you guys having me on.
No, our pleasure.
Well, how can we really travel back in time, or is this just an illusion? I mean, someday are we going to get to the point where we could possibly go into the future or into the past? And which one would be easier if we had to pick a starting point?
Well, going into the future is definitely easier. I mean, we could do that now. And there's been a number of studies that have actually done so, that have looked at the effects of high-speed motion and gravity, and especially in reference to those that remain at rest on Earth. We still experience gravity here, and that's a big part of it. But traveling at high speed, relative to those who stay in a rest frame, you can travel into the future. That was one of Einstein's earliest contributions to our understanding.
That's not really time traveling. We're talking about what, a minute here or there, right? I mean, I'm talking about, let's go 100 years from now or 1,000 years from now.
Well, it'll take speed. Yeah, it'll just take speed. We need to increase the rate at which we can travel linearly in a vector capacity. And I don't think we're too far from that. I mean, you still notice it. You're right. It's a couple minutes here, a couple minutes there. But if we were able to harness the power of electromagnetism and get past this ancient technology of rocket-propelled vector engines, then I think we'd quickly see that we could travel very rapidly into the future. I think that would be the starting point, to answer your question, where we could actually start to really work with time a little bit. The people that went on this space voyage for 5-10 minutes or 5 to 10 years, if they're really dedicated, might come back to something entirely different than the culture they left from.
Well, now, we have the, of course, a lot of science fiction books on time travel. The Time Machine is one that comes to mind.
Yeah, that was great.
Okay, well, we're talking about time capsule here. You're talking about going off into space and at the speed of, near the speed of light, or certainly at high velocity. How about coming up with something that I can have in the, like Tim and I were doing before? I'm working on this little contraption here, and I know it will take me somewhere else. Am I hallucinating? Am I delusional? Or is somebody inventing something of that sort in their basement right now?
Well, no, it's not going to be something that we can create in a basement. And I think there's a lot of reasons why we wouldn't want everyday people to have that technology. In the same way we don't want everyday people to have nuclear weapons.
But it's not up to you. Right? I'm saying you say they shouldn't have it, but that doesn't say that some guy. Well, now when I was in England, in the town of Bath, okay, there was a rumor that somebody was working on a time machine that actually really worked. And years later, I saw a video. I don't know whether it was on YouTube or where. I don't know whether it was the actual experiment going on or somebody recreated, or maybe that's where somebody got the idea that there was an actual experiment going on, is that they had seen the video as well and thought that it was the real thing. I don't know. I'm confused, but we have a fellow. Tim, remember we have a book actually, I think, out there, How to Build a Time Machine, that Patricia Reese, is that her name?
Yes.
Wrote a number of years for her. And there is a fellow out there. Do you remember his name offhand? Who claims
not
that
offhand. I know who you're talking about.
That he's been tinkering in his, I say his basement, it could be his garage, with some device. Well, what would we need to come up with something like that? I mean, okay, you talk about, traveling at high velocity, but is there any other way to circumvent that and come up with some other way of getting from here to there?
Yeah, no, You interrupted me. I wasn't saying that not possible for that there'll be like some overarching body that keeps people from doing that. What I was trying to say is that the amount of energy and the technology and the material science and the engineering that's involved in that will be prohibitive for nearly any individual, and probably even large institutions. If that's going to happen, it's going to require it's probably national governments or private industry in order to be able to harness the energy necessary to do that. It's going to be a very difficult thing. I wasn't saying that there won't be the possibility that people can figure this out in their basement or make models that could do this, but to actually bend
Mhm.
space-time enough to travel into the past, that's going to require a collaborative effort. It's going to be something like the CERN Institute or the LIGO
Yes.
efforts to understand gravitational waves. So I wasn't saying that. I was just saying that it's going to be something that, like the International Space Station is another great example, where we come together as a collective human society in order to be able to really work toward putting together the physics of this and possibly even anthropology, trying to understand what happens if we go to the past and what could be the ramifications of that. So I think it's going to be a very large, collaborative, and expensive effort that'll be prohibitive for a lot of people that don't have access to the technology and the engineers and the energy necessary to actually pull it off.
Now, I've noticed here that your book, you've written a book called Identified Flying Objects. Is there a connection between UFOs and time travel? I think in particular, there are some people who are of the thinking that the object that landed in the Rendlesham Forest over in the UK on the week of Christmas in 1980 might have been a time travel device. Any possibility of that?
Yeah, Jim Peniston is the main proponent of that. He claims to have had an experience, and I think it's what he argues is very valid. I actually talk about that a little bit in the book. I learned of his experience very much toward the end of the writing process, but I felt that it was important because what he claims to have experienced in this encounter very much dovetails with what I had been writing about for the last 7 years. So having two different approaches and very different reasons for investigating this and proposing this come together in a way that backs each other up, I thought was very important to put in the book. So yeah, the experience that you're making reference to in Rendlesham Forest, and like I said, I discussed this a little bit in the book, is that he touched this thing and it sent him all of this information in binary code, I believe, but it was that we are from the future, that we are time travelers from the future, and the details that go along with that are almost even more interesting and more telling. And I think the most exciting part of it, that they demonstrate that this really did happen, and there's a lot of things that are really indicative of the reality of that ability to travel back through time that are mentioned in his account that I put into my book, because they came together. I'm really glad, honestly, that I learned of this at the very end, because I had written this around my own scientific background and the research that I've done in modern physics and astronomy and astrobiology and anthropology. But having come across his account right at the very end, it was mind-blowing to me. He received information in that moment that I feel was truthful and very valid.
Now, do you think it's necessary to have a device? I'm thinking of offhand some of these experiments that have been done at like SRI. They call it remote viewing, and I know I've had some experiences myself, certainly not of any great consequence, where it's possible that I might have slipped out of the body and traveled through, I'm being dramatic, perhaps time and space, but I saw things and witnessed things that later turned out to be true. Now, some people, we think, Tim, remember we had on Ben, our friend Ben over in England, and he wrote that, or did actually a YouTube video on the lady over there who got into quite a bit of trouble. In fact, she was, I believe, arrested under the witchcraft.
Right.
Yeah, but in England. And this was during World War II, where she actually saw something happening with a ship going down or a boat being torpedoed that nobody even knew about at the time. It seems like to have been a precognition. I mean, where does precognition stop and time travel. It seems perhaps it's all part of the same plan there or something.
Yeah, I think it's definitely important to recognize consciousness as something that's not bound by space time, and people have been struggling this for ages. Like, what is the soul? What is consciousness? And we still have a lot of unanswered questions related to that. Like, what is this thing that makes us animated? That makes us alive? And clearly, you can see the synapses firing and the dendritic connections in the brain, and you can see the metabolism and the energies and the metabolic rate. But there seems to be something that transcends that too. And if there is this energy associated with consciousness in the mind, and it's not bound by physics, and it's not bound by our material being, then yeah, I absolutely think there could be some sort of ability to transcend space-time in that way. I experience this very often in the form of deja vu, where I see moments in my subconscious, in my dreaming state, that eventually come true. Sometimes it's very long periods of time, decades even, but I still remember the exact dream when it happened, even though I was a much younger human being. But sometimes it'll be a couple weeks later, and it can oftentimes be very intense at those times. If it was a recent thing where I just dreamt that, oftentimes I can predict what that person's going to say because it just happened. And it's not a familiarity like, oh, I felt this before. It's the exact same thing that happened. However, that also needs to be separated from the physical properties of traveling backward in time. And that's what I really discuss in the book, is how we, as future humans, could harness the technology and the engineering, the material sciences, to be able to bend space-time, to create what are known as closed time-like curves by reorienting light cones toward the past in order to actually visit the past. And that, I feel like those are two separate things almost, that there is this ability to exit our physical form. And remote viewing is one that I think requires a lot of future study. It's really interesting, and there is evidence of that, and even early stages of telepathy and many of these things that our extraterrestrial descendants are reported doing all the time. But the book mostly focuses on the physical evidence ever since Einstein's 1915 paper on general relativity and all of the solutions to his field equations, how we might actually bend space-time to visit the past. But I'm very interested.
How can we do that? How can we do that?
Well, what I look at in the book is the long history of research since that paper, and almost everything centers on the rapid rotation of a highly energetic and or highly massive object, because E equals mc squared, energy and mass are essentially the same thing. So if you can create frame dragging, or what's known as the lens stirring effect, you're able to warp space-time and reorient those light cones downward. And what I mostly talk about in the book is this aspect of biology where form follows function. And if you look at the form of these craft, if you look at the actual structure of them and what they're constantly reported doing, it's a disc-shaped entity rotating, oftentimes at a high rate of speed, oftentimes changing color, changing its position in the light spectrum, most likely because of friction with the atmosphere, which indicates that it's rotating faster or slower. So even I highlight some studies that have been done recently by Italian physicists looking at that same effect being created by the Earth, which is a very small planet rotating very slowly, but they were still able to quantitatively measure that frame dragging effect, the lens stirring effect here on Earth. So if we could take something that was highly massive, or more likely highly electromagnetic, because the electromagnetic force is 10 to the 40 times stronger than gravity, which is not only most likely its propulsion aspects, but also potentially this frame dragging effect. If we were able to harness the electromagnetic force, and we had almost every physicist will agree that we're going to have to combine our understanding of modern physics and also with quantum mechanics, which will have to be unified theory at some point. But once we get to that point, yes, it's potentially very possible that we could start to piece these things together. And most importantly, the vast majority of physicists agree that there isn't really anything that prohibits backward time travel. And if it's not strictly prohibited by the laws of nature, and we have these amazing minds that have given us the ability to talk to each other through microphones and the computers and the internet and all of the other amazing things we've done, potentially we could also solve that mystery. And so I highlight the long history of research since Einstein's 1915 paper that seems to sort of point us in that direction. That indicates that we're on a track to be there at some point.
Now, can we pick the period of time that we want to go back to? I mean, Tim and I were being chased by a T-Rex. I mean, we just stumbled upon that period by accident. Could we have selected somewhere else to travel to?
Well, it's interesting that we started this conversation with Jim Peniston's experience, because there was one thing in his description of that encounter that really stood out to me. And it was that they told him that we can only go so far into the past. I forget the exact number, but we can only go so far into the past because we can't go fast enough. And that was really telling, because, and again, why I'm so glad I came across this right before I finished up the book, because I had already been writing about all of this physics research in the context of how you reorient those light cones toward the past. But one thing that's missing from that is that it takes you traveling at a very high rate of speed to travel into the future of that past. So it's that very first thing we started with in this conversation about creating that future time travel, where you're traveling at a high rate of speed relative to the speed of light, or what's known as time dilation and special relativity. But it takes that reorientation of your light cones toward the past and traveling at a high rate of speed to go into the future of that past. And so when I read that, my mind was blown. I was like, wow, this might actually have some legs. Like, that makes sense. If they can only travel so fast, that limits how far they can go into the past. And then getting back to the future, potentially that doesn't involve any sort of rotation. Potentially that's just traveling at a high rate of speed and using that time dilation effect to rewind time back to the future from which you left. So I think, yes, to some extent they'll be able to calculate those trajectories. They're going to have to, because I think it's science, and they're going to have to try to figure out what time period to investigate and how to do it.
All right, I'm going to have to interrupt you here because we have to go to our bottom of the hour break. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation about time travel, UFOs, and other fun stuff on Exploring the Bizarre.
Now back to Exploring the Bizarre with two of the most electrifying researchers in the paranormal, your hosts, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
And welcome back to Exploring the Bizarre. I'm Tim Swartz. Tonight we're talking with Dr. Michael Masters, the author of the book Identified Flying Objects, a multidisciplinary scientific approach to the UFO phenomena. And Dr. Masters, the one of the parts of your book that I really enjoyed is where you were talking about a lot of people who have had, say like close encounters with, like UFO pilots, while not all the time, the majority of the sightings involve humanoid type creatures. And you talk about, how more than likely, if there was intelligent life that was able to reach our planet through the vast distances of space, they're probably not going to look like us. You're not going to see, two arms, two legs, but almost all the time when you hear about these accounts, that's what people are describing as, the beings coming out of these landed UFOs.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's an important part of the equation to consider. And I've said many times, if these reports are always elephant creatures or giant spider bears or something, I never would have written this book. But the fact that they're described in the exact terms of not just a primate, but a human primate, a hominin, our specific lineage where we stood upright and started walking on two legs about 6 to 8 million years ago, like that really initiated a number of changes that make us unique among all animals on Earth. And the fact that we possess this uniqueness among every other species, like countless billions of species on this planet, whether they're in the ocean and they're floating and they're swimming, or they're in the air and they're flying, the ones that are terrestrial, that are walking on this surface that we have, are almost ubiquitously quadrupedal. But we're bipedal. We stood upright. And that set in motion a number of changes related to our brain size, our facial size, the ability to use our hands, which has been crucial for things like not just building stone tools early on, but the progression of culture and the ability to type on computers and use cell phones. And we take that for granted now, but it really took our ancestors coming down from the trees where the whole of primate evolution had taken place to be able to do those things. So yeah, for that to happen on another planet in a distant solar system, and most importantly, still talking about time, for that to happen at the same time as it did now, and that they could find us and that they could come here, and all of the different problems with finding us and communicating with us and knowing our languages and having had that same separate evolution with a different chemical structure and gravity and climate and distance from the sun and atmosphere, it just seems extremely unlikely that that would ever happen somewhere else at the same time as it did now here on Earth. And if you look at those past evolutionary changes, the things like the increased brain size, what we call encephalization, or increased roundedness of the skull, what we call neurocranial globularity, reduced face, the upright walking, the same number of digits on each hand and foot, being tetrapods, being pentadactyl. All of these things are so characteristic of an Earth species and a hominin Earth species that it just seems more logical to assume or propose and then back up with evidence, I guess, that they're actually us from the future.
Well, and one of the other aspects about the UFO phenomena is that there's been a number of different cases where these UFO occupants seem to have a very almost intimate knowledge of the background and even the future of the people that they end up talking to. If a lot of these cases just seem to be random, somebody's driving down the road, a UFO appears above them, they're taken on board, and these creatures proceed to tell them where tell the witness, like where they were born, where they're going, and that next week, their Uncle Bob is going to die in a car accident. So, and I've always asked this, with other investigators, all right, why would, say, like a scientist from another planet here to, study the biology or whatever on our planet would have this kind of knowledge?
Yeah, and why would they care? Why would they even care?
Exactly,
to find out?
right.
And
yeah.
how would they get that knowledge? How would they know those things? Yeah, I know there's a lot of cases like that, and the fact that there was the flap during World War II with all the Foo Fighters, that they're seen most often around major historic and prehistoric sites, that they're found during major periods in our history, both historic and prehistoric. It seems to indicate that it's an aspect of investigating time and investigating humans. And And that's definitely like what I do is I'm an anthropologist, a biological anthropologist with a specialization in paleoanthropology, and that's what we do is we study the past. And there's absolutely no better way to study the past than actually be there and be a part of it. And we don't possess that technology now, but if we did, I mean, there's so many digs I've been on where it's just you're baking in the sun, there's mosquitoes everywhere, and you still have 4 hours to go, and you're just like, what if we could just watch from the sky or pick a couple of them up and do a biomedical examination and look at them and ask them questions, maybe, and we would have the ability to do that because we speak a descendant language of theirs. So, and the fact that that's what I would do as a modern anthropologist, and that's what most of these reports describe as something very similar to that, makes me again think that there could be a connection there.
Well, and one of the things that I've written about myself when it comes to this subject that UFOs could be time travelers is that really what better way to disguise yourself if you live thousands of years in the future and you have the ability to travel in the past. From historical records that people were seeing unidentified flying objects and talking to alleged, alien creatures from that time period. Like, hey, we'll disguise ourselves as these UFOs, and if somebody does happen to run across this, hey, yeah, we're from Zeta Reticuli. Yeah, that's the ticket.
No, I know. We talk about there's this big thing in the UFO community right now about disinformation propagation and who's telling us what to try to get us off track. But yeah, you're right. There's been a number of those cases where people were told we're from this star, this galaxy or whatever, and that's not realistic. You can't come from a different galaxy with the speed at which they're traveling away from each other. It's just, in any case, I think there's also something to be said for why they would do that. And that's an important question. Like, if they were from a different planet, wouldn't you expect them after 100 years or thousands of years of traveling across the cosmos to get out and say, hey, we just got here, we're from this planet? And there would be a broad introduction, and the heads of state of different nations would come out and introduce them, and we'd all say, wow, we're not alone in the universe. But it's not like that. It's picking people up in remote parts of the woods where there's nobody, and doing things that I would do as an anthropologist or a linguist or someone studying,
or maybe things you wouldn't do in some of these cases.
Yeah, absolutely. I wouldn't want to stick a probe up somebody's butt and take poop out of it. I'll tell you that. But there's a lot of information that can be gained from that too. So yeah, the elusiveness of this phenomenon, it doesn't make sense in the context of extraterrestrials, but it does kind of make sense in the context of extraterrestrials. And what we were talking about during the break about there's no evidence really that we could disrupt the past or that we could change the future, because the way that physicists understand it in block time or landscape time, anytime you travel back to the past from the future, anything you did back then is already a part of that future from which you left. It's already consistent within those things. So we don't have to necessarily worry about messing up the future, changing the future, pushing us into an alternate universe or reality. But you could still understand why, at a time when people still conceptualize them as beings from a different planet, and they, as you said, feed us this information, sort of disinformation thing, that we would still not quite be ready to understand that maybe it's our future brethren.
Well, now, if we traveled into the past or into the future, would we be visible to the people of that time, since we really didn't exist? And also, a second part of that question: what do you think about some of these supposed time distortions on YouTube, where people from one period of time show up elsewhere? One woman supposedly carrying a cell phone in her hand and talking on it, but yet she's not living in the time when cell phones had been invented yet.
Yeah, no, those are great questions. The first one kind of harkens back to what we were talking about earlier, like the consciousness and the way in which we can move about space-time with our consciousness, however that is measured. And I'll be the first to admit we haven't measured it yet. So I actually don't talk about that in the book just because of that. I try to keep the book really centered on what we can know and what we can't know. And unfortunately, we don't yet have a lot of knowledge about these more ethereal consciousness, space-time travels types of things. I'd love to work on that in the future, but the physical aspects of it, yes, you would see them. You would see us if we did it, because the main takeaway here is that you separate your own localized reference frame from global space-time. That if you're, say in this particular instance, spinning this highly energetic electromagnetic disk around, and you're reorienting light cones toward the past and then traveling at a high rate of speed through space in order to visit the past, what you're doing is separating your position in space-time from those of the global space-time that you left, and then rejoining it at that place when you get out. However you calculate that, I think we're probably hundreds or thousands of years away from being able to calculate how that works. So yeah, you would be there. You would actually be a part of the past. And physicists have talked a lot about, what if you visit yourself in the past? What if you show up as an older adult visiting a child that's you in the past? What they know for certain is that when you grow up to be that adult, you will go back in time to visit yourself in the past. If that exists in the past, it will exist in the future. And that's the self-consistency inherent in this. It's referred to as the Novikov self-consistency principle. But to get to your second question about the pictures, ever since I started talking about this and interacting with people, I've had so many people send me these types of pictures that you're making reference to, and they're really interesting. They really are. I'm honestly not in a position to say whether they're real or fake, but if we do, this is what I will say. If we do get to the point where we have the ability to travel back in time, this comes up. I've talked about this with many people, and they're always like, well, it sucks that we're going to have to wait to know, because it is a testable theory. It's going to suck to wait to know if, like, when we can test it, when we get to that point that we're doing this. And I tell them, not necessarily, because if we are traveling back from the future to the past, they could fill us in on this at any point. They could also be picking people up from any point in the future that they wanted to. And there are those reports too, where you have the big-headed, small-faced, large-eyed, bipedal humanoids that also, there's a guy in a suit in the corner, and he's just writing stuff down and taking notes. He looks very modern human, but with all of these future humans. And that's a very real scenario in the context of backward time travel at some point in the distant future. So yeah, if it was a point in the not too distant future where they still looked like us and they had technology that was advanced beyond our own, but not that much more advanced, perhaps they could hitch a ride with someone from the distant future. And it's the same way looking backward. What I try to do in this book a lot is look at it from their point of view, from our current point of view, meaning the future human's point of view, from our point of view. If we could do this now, and we went back 200 years in the past, and we had our cell phones, and we had our golf clubs and whatnot, they would see us as different. But it's not going to be like if we took that cell phone and golf clubs back 200,000 years in the past or 2 million years in the past. It's going to be a very different experience. So, yeah, I think, maybe some of those could potentially be real, but I'm not in a position to say whether they are or not. But just looking at the holistic aspects of time and how time travel would work at whatever point in the future we're able to do it, there is the potential for that to be real.
Now, how did you decide, or why did you decide to write this book and have those fellow associates of yours with academic degrees and so forth? I mean, do they think that you might be operating on the fringe, or are they accepting of some of your theories and concepts?
Yeah, I mean, they're not really. I guess I've written a book almost to the point that it's not really my concepts. It's our modern understanding of anthropology and astrobiology and physics and astronomy that are just brought together to back up this idea. So it's hard for them to read it and then just think that I'm speculating about things or I'm saying things because there is this idea, the idea that we're extraterrestrials, that we're coming from the future to the past, and that this UFO phenomenon can be explained as such. But I'm also not just making claims that can't be backed up by something. I think that's a really important thing, not just about this book, but about ufology in general, is that we need to start doing that more. We need to get away from the speculation and just have an honest conversation. What can we know and what can we not know? And what I'm trying to do...
Did you ever have a UFO experience?
No, I haven't, unfortunately. This all started because my father had one before I was born.
Well, there you go. Okay, well, tell us about that a little bit.
Well, he's a veterinarian in a very rural part of Northeast Ohio in Amish country where I grew up. And he was out with a colleague, and so that adds a little credibility to it because there were two individuals that witnessed the same thing. And he actually radioed it back to my mother, who took care of the radios and the call-ins and communicating with them. So there's three people technically. But yeah, it was your standard IFO encounter. This glowing ball of light they came over the crest of a hill, and it was sitting over on the next horizon, and they saw it as a very bright glowing orb. And there's not a lot of lights in Amish country. I don't know if you've ever had the chance to visit, but it's very dark, and that's one of its beauties, is that you can see so many stars. In any case, they stopped, and they're like, "What is that? I don't know. What is that?" And all of a sudden, it shot toward them and sat about 100 meters from their truck for a short period of time, shot back across the horizon, and then he recalls it just darting straight up into the sky. And I remember hearing him tell that story when I was 8 years old, and that in itself kind of piqued my interest. But then he bought the book Communion by Whitley Strieber, who I'm sure most of your listeners are familiar with. And just seeing that image on the cover of the book kind of spurred this image in my head that I have kind of turned into a logo, I guess, of this early hominin form or chimpanzee-like form, a modern human, and then this quintessential archetypal alien form on the cover of Strieber's book. And I just started a lifelong journey toward trying to understand whether or not there could be a connection. And obviously, I talk about this early on in the book, there's the potential for confirmation bias in that I could just be looking for things that back this up because I thought about it when I was 8. But as a scientist, I'm very aware of biases and really go out of my way to present the counterpoint to everything too. Like, here's what we know, here's the dissenting opinions. A big part of it in the book is Stephen Hawking's dissenting opinions. He hated the idea of backward time travel, and he went out of his way to present hypotheses and conjectures about why it might not be possible at any point in our future. And one of his most well known is the chronology protection conjecture, which is something people can look up because it's really interesting. It's very interesting to read about.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but we're closing in on the end of the program, and I do want to let people know how they can get in touch with you, where they can find the book. Give us the title once again, and what you might be doing into the future. So give us a little information on that if you have a website or whatever.
Oh yeah, there is a website. I guess it's an obscure website name, as it turns out, but it's just an abbreviation of the book title, idflyobj.com, idflyobj.com. And there's links to Facebook and Twitter. There's also a contact page, and it's been really great. I get up to work in the morning to my office, and I get a lot of emails and messages from people in all of those different formats. And it's been really great having these discussions. But there's also a link. I've got some speaking engagements coming up. I just booked the MUFON 50th anniversary today, and the International UFO Congress in Phoenix later. I think it's in September, early September. The UFO Festival in McMinnville, Oregon.
Oh, yeah. We're gonna have Tim. Are we gonna have somebody on to talk about that?
Yeah, early next month.
Yeah, there you
nice,
go. So,
awesome. I'll just be in the vendor area for that one. My agent didn't get in touch with them in time. To actually get into the talk.
So give us the name. Give us the name of the book again.
It's Identified Flying Objects: A Multidisciplinary Scientific Approach to the UFO Phenomenon. And it's just a very conservative, holistic, scientific approach to trying to get some answers to this.
And I bet we can find it on Amazon.
It's on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Kobo. I did an audiobook, which has been popular because there's a lot of scientific jargon in it. I do try to explain it, so even if somebody had the paperback, they wouldn't feel burdened by the jargon. But it is a scientific book, and I think the audiobook's been popular because it can just be explained without having to read through it. So yeah, it's on Apple iTunes, it's on Audible, wherever you can find books online, basically.
Oh, okay. Well, also I want to mention that Tim Swartz has done a book. It's Time Travel Fact or Fiction. Isn't that the name, Tim?
Yes.
Yeah. And also, okay, and that's on Amazon, of course. And the archives to the show are available in illustrated form at our YouTube site, which would be Mr. UFO's Secret Files, where Tim and I become cartoon characters thanks to Peter Bernard, our producer of the program. And I want to thank you for being on with us this evening. And we've learned a lot, but it's time to travel into the future. And till next week, we wish you all well and good.
You've been listening to Exploring the Bizarre with hosts Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz. They're taking back the night by jetting non-stop across the cosmos in search of the truly bizarre and totally unexplained, with you as their co-pilot. Thursday nights at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10 p.m. Eastern, on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. For more information on Exploring the Bizarre and hosts Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz, check out their KCOR Digital Radio Network page. Follow their YouTube channel at MRUFO 1100. Exploring the Bizarre.